Hey everyone, this is Fran from the 5 Minute Modeler. Thanks for joining today, and I just want to say thank you to all of those who watch and comment on the videos. I'm having a great time building this out and sharing my progress with you. Hopefully, you find some helpful hints or tricks that are useful to you as well. That would be the icing on the cake. I've been getting a lot completed on the module even though I was sick for about a week. I'll take you through what we've done to this point, and I think you'll like what you see. As always, if you have any comments on how I can make it better, let me know. Certainly, if you have any questions on how I do things, ask away in the comments. The way I do things works for me, usually, and may not be for everyone. There are many ways to do various elements of the hobby, and part of the fun is experimenting and trying different methods to see what you like and what works. If you want to see what we did in the last video, the link is here. There's also a playlist where you can watch the entire project's progress. With that, let's jump in and see what I've been doing. In these first scenes, I'm going to apply static grass and ground foam to various parts of the scenery. I'm using the Woodland Scenic glue and spreading it with an old paintbrush. I applied the glue directly to the surface, but in retrospect, I probably would have done a bit better putting the glue in a small container and pulling it from there and possibly even diluting it. Doing it the way I showed end up with a bit more glue than was necessary. And you don't need to use Woodland Scenic's products. You can use Artist Matte Medium, PVA type glue, many others. After spreading the glue, I pulled out my static grass applicator. I bit the bullet after watching a bunch of videos about static grass, and I bought the power transformer for the unit. After getting it, I noticed that the output of the transformer is 12 volts, not the 9 volts that you get from the battery. Plus, the power is consistent, and I don't have to worry about battery drain. Just my opinion, and I'm as guilty as anyone on this, I generally think I use too much green in my ground level scenery. I've noticed this in a lot of other folks' videos too. Now, in real life, green scenery is more prevalent in certain parts of the country than others, and typically is more green in the spring than summer, fall, or winter. In those times, you tend to see more straw-colored or brownish tinted growth. So, to try and recreate the summer effect, I'm starting with 2mm and 4mm straw-colored static grass and applying it with the applicator. I'm mixing the two together. They are slightly different colors, so I'm hoping that I get a nice blend. I will say that the size of the static grass dispenser seems to be a bit large for N scale. A smaller container might be a bit easier to work with, and I understand there are others out there by other manufacturers. So the 2mm grass scales out to just over 12 inches tall, and the 4mm about 25 inches tall. I'm starting with this around the storage tracks. Next, I used some 2mm and 4mm green static grass. After applying it, it looks like there's too much, but I'll vacuum up the excess once the glue starts to set up a bit. The grass has a tendency to get on the rest of the scenery, so I start vacuuming it up using my miniature Woodland Scenics vacuum. It does an okay job at picking up until there's about a ½ inch of material in the bin, then you have to empty it. Once the loose grass was vacuumed up, I rather liked the look so. Once I ballasted the tracks, I'll be adding more growth on and around the tracks. For a small section that's going to be closer to the docks and where the red shed is going, I laid down some glue, then spread various mediums over the glue. The first layer I use is what I call the dirt layer, though I don't use real dirt. When I was building my layout, I used masonite splines for the roadbed. I used my table saw to cut the masonite into strips. This left me with a lot of very fine brown sawdust, which I've been using throughout my layout. It works very much like ground foam. Using my fingers, I sprinkle this on the glued area. I then follow with several colors of ground foam, including a light yellow, a burnt grass, medium green. I then sprayed it with my mixture of water and IPA before pulling out the static grass applicator. In this case, I'm using the spoils from what I vacuumed up in the earlier section, so a mixture of straw and light green colors. Now, there are probably 100 videos on how to ballast your track. I used to get frustrated with this process as the glue would ball up or not soak in, but over the years I've refined my process to where now it's nowhere near as daunting a task as it used to be. I am using Woodland Scenic's ballast, and I'm using 4 different colors: light gray, dark gray, cinders, and off-white. I mix the various flavors in a small plastic cup until they are well mixed, and then I spread the ballast to the logical locations along the track, and using a fan brush, spread it out so that the ballast sits below the ties. I take care to get as much ballast off the ties and rails as I can, and the next part is what really made my ballasting so much more satisfying. I spray a mixture of water and IPA onto the ballast from about a foot up. I use a fine mist, and this allows the moisture to gently soak into the ballast without disturbing the placement. I then mix my glue solution, which differs from most people. I tend to use about 20 to 25% PVA glue to water, and then add several drops of IPA to the mixture. I mix it well, and then I use a pipette to draw the glue in and then locate over the appropriate location. I make sure the glue mixture is flowing appropriately and move down the line. You can see the glue move through the ballast fairly easily. If needed, I go back over the spots that don't look like they got enough glue. This method has worked well for me over the years. So for my next layers, I'm going to use a wide variety of scenic materials, including some lichen, some foliage clusters, medium green foliage, and light green coarse turf. I begin with foliage clusters, taking a clump and pulling off a smaller clump into 1 to 2 foot scale sizes until I have a decent supply. I also take the lichen and create shrub-sized pieces in the same way. For these, I just dip them in a puddle of white glue and drop them where it makes sense, pushing them into the surface. This is an area where I don't think you can have too much of any of these, especially since this is a flat surface for the most part. Next, I'm going to add taller static grass to key locations to give yet another level of texture. Most railroad right-of-ways are covered in tall weeds and grasses along the edges. To create this look, I'm using the boomer diorama method of stab and stick. That is, I take a clump of static grass, generally the 7mm, I pinch it between my fingers and roll it till the end is relatively flat, dip it in the glue, then stab it into the scenery at a logical place. This can be a bit tedious, so I try and split this up at various times. The part of the module that worried me the most was the water. As I showed in previous video, the water on the non-ship side of the jetty was made with toilet paper and white glue. The other side of the wharf was just a thin coat of drywall compound sanded smooth. I decided to start on the smooth side first. I'll call it the ship side. This is where the ship and the apron will reside. This side was dredged to make sure there was sufficient draft for the chief, but for the water, I was thinking I would start out with an olive green tone along the shore, then gradually take on a bit more blue to signify depth moving out. But the color changes need to be subtle for maximum realism. I start using the following colors: hooker green, white, raw umber, red, and cerulean blue. I begin by mixing the green and raw umber together, which darkens the green. Adding a bit of red brings in the olive coloring. Using a flat brush, I start with the edges, kind of dabbing, pulling, and pushing the paint around. One key is that I haven't totally mixed the paint, so that streaks of one or the other color may show as I paint it. I can easily blend that into the surrounding area, thereby blending the colors. As I move outwards, I add a bit of blue to the paint and use that as a start to the deeper water. I knew the first coat was likely not going to be the final coat, as much of it would soak into the plaster. Here are some shots of the first two coats. Not bad, but still not dark enough, I thought. For the next two layers, I used a slightly damp sponge and dipped it into the paint mixture, which I mixed a bit darker and a little less blue, then blotted much of the paint off with the rag. I then started dabbing the sponge onto the area, and this really started to make the area pop. The sponge allowed for different paint colors to hit in different spots and also let some of the lighter layers show through. I was pretty pleased with the results. Bob Ross used to say, "To see light, you must have dark," and that was pretty evident here. I used the sponge method 3 times before I was satisfied with the colors. I then used a gloss medium to give the surface the wet water look I was looking for. I started using a brush for this, but due to the thickness of the material, it was leaving brush marks. So I pulled out the sponge, used that, dabbing everywhere to cover the scene. I let each coat dry overnight and then added another coat, and in total I believe there are 4 coats of medium. Here you can see the results. Well, that's all I've got for this episode, but I am really excited as to how this is turning out. There's still a lot to do, but I can see what the end product is going to look like. I hope you do too. So thanks again for following along, and we'll see you on another episode of the 5-Minute Modeler.